Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English 2367. This is K-Swizzle checking in with your week 4 overview. At the time of me recording this lecture, which is on Sunday evening, you will probably have noticed by now that I have not had a chance to grade your assignment submissions for weeks 2 and 3. Those are pending. Unfortunately, there's been a kind of resurgence of the cold that I was battling, that I got over it, and now it seems to have come back. So my apologies for being behind. I will be pausing this lecture as unfortunately we've become accustomed to so that I can cough. I'm not sure why I am dealing with these colds. It is quite miserable, but nevertheless, I am, as always, really happy to have you in class this semester. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and take us through what is on the agenda for this lecture. So there are 3 parts to this lecture. The first is this week's theme, Codes of Conduct, Self-Branding on Social Media in the 2000s and 2010s, where I will talk us through the guiding questions for this week. Then I'll move us to this week's to-do list, tasks to complete before watching the next lecture, which consists of what to read, what to watch, and what to listen to. And finally, I will talk through the assignment snapshots or provide an overview of week 4 assignments. I will mention briefly highlight reel number 4, but I'm going to really spend the majority of the time for this section on response paper number 2. So let's talk about this week's theme, or Codes of Conduct, Self-Branding on Social Media in the 2000s and 2010s. Now, this is going to be the final week where we really focus on a kind of overview content. So what I've really done in these first 4 weeks of the semester, given that this is an accelerated course and we're doing the work that we would ordinarily cover in, a fall or spring semester in fewer weeks during the summer, we're only getting 4 weeks to really devote towards, trying to do as best as we can, a kind of overview of what some of the conversations and texts look like focused on social media self-representation. So with that in mind, I wanted to make sure that our 4th week and final week that kind of builds us into the semester research project, which I'll talk about in week 5, I wanted to make sure that we had a week that really focused on social media influencing and specifically gave us an opportunity to think about what it means to self-represent in the context of building a self-brand. And you'll hear me refer to the term self-brand throughout the week because not only is it, of course, represented in the theme itself of self-branding on social media, but I especially want us to take some of the knowledge that we've already developed in terms of an awareness of the algorithm, and affordances of digital tools on social media, and in thinking about algorithms, of course, also being wary of the constraints and corporate control that, of course, also impedes on creators' abilities to self-mediate to the extent that they wish to. And I want us to keep all of that in mind when we think about the social media influencer economy that really was born out of the 2010s and continues to be a really important feature of what we see happening on social media in terms of, how celebrities who are more recently, on these platforms, how they themselves are choosing to portray themselves, as well as we can also see a way in which influencing on TikTok, for example, looks much different compared to Instagram or YouTube. So the guiding questions to take us through these ideas as we go into this week are as follows. How and why are girls encouraged to create self-brands on the internet? Through a logic of branding, how does empowerment become linked to online self-presentation and the self as product? So like I said, you'll hear me use the term self-brands quite a bit in the focus lecture, but especially I want us to be thinking about what does it mean to do social media marketing and branding in which the individual person is the product that is being portrayed, right? As opposed to offering, let's say, a good or service in a more traditional capitalist sense, like we are accustomed to seeing in US media. How does the social media influencer instead situate themselves as the kind of main focus of their content and then effectively create a brand based on themselves as that main focus? And we also want to consider, what is it about social media influencing that also creates this idea that a person can feel empowered or be empowered by being visible online? And especially this idea that by being visible on your own terms, that visibility is really allowing you to portray a version of yourself, of course, that is sort of fully within your rights and control. Now, as we've already started to see, there are limitations to this when we do think about things like terms of service on a platform or the algorithm. But for our purposes, we're going to really think about how does an online self that is created on platforms like Instagram or TikTok or YouTube ultimately then function as a self being a product. Okay, and we'll dive into that more in the focus lecture. My next cluster of questions for you is, what is the attention economy? How are viewers trained to engage with content uploaded to Instagram compared to content uploaded to TikTok? How does the design, for example, homepage, individual posts, etc., of each platform facilitate viewing? Now, the act of viewing or looking at something is going to be especially important for us this week when we talk about Diana Zuli's article. And reason for this is because what we're going to want to really consider when it comes to social media influencing and the use of these content creators, their use of the tools available to them via these social media platforms, is we're going to want to consider what does it mean to exist within an attention economy as people who use social media, as people who consume media across mediums in the 21st century, and especially how does the platform that a creator is using determine to what extent perhaps the duration of their content is, perhaps if they're uploading static images as opposed to video, right? Short form video or long form video, a combination of both, et cetera, et cetera. But we really want to think about how does the way that we look at things and the duration or how long we spend or how much time we spend looking at something actually help us to get a sense for the ways in which our attention is actually really important within the grand scheme of media industries, okay? And finally, my third cluster of questions is, how do social media platforms transform and build on existing perceptions of celebrity and stardom? Can a social media influencer achieve a comparable ubiquitous fame to that of a traditional celebrity? So my real question, or kind of real point of these questions, I should say, is when it comes to functioning as an internet celebrity, which social media influencers effectively are an example of, will there ever be a point at which they are fully competitive with the traditional celebrities that are familiar to us through legacy media forms like radio, television, film, and advertising, right? Is a person whose fame originates online ever going to be able to shake that internet celebrity title, or that will they forever be known as an internet celebrity first, and kind of whatever fame they may acquire elsewhere in legacy media industries, will that always bear with it the stigma of being first famous or known to the public online? And of course, these conversations are building on last week's theme of slice of life storytelling on social media, personal narratives as artivism and public education, or what we can also shorten to think of as representing the self. Before I cover this week's to-do list, I'm going to pause to cough and I will be right back. All right, thank you for being patient with that little pause. Let's go ahead and talk through this week's to-do list or the tasks to complete before watching the next lecture. So as you should already be accustomed to, I hope that you're looking at the schedule of assignments document that is posted to Carmen under the course materials module. For this week, once again, I have it broken down into sections as to what it is that you'll want to cover and need to do in order to reach the point that you are, comfortable and ready to do the assignments for this week. But as always, my weekly overview is meant to kind of be a companion piece to looking at this document in the hopes that it clarifies anything that maybe is confusing, unclear, but also just can give you some insight as to why we're doing some of the things that we're doing for the week. So this week's readings, you have 3 of them. I'm going to start with the articles that are shown on the middle and right side of the screen, then I'll work backwards. But for your articles for this week, or I should say secondary source readings, we'll be looking at Diana Zuli's Capitalizing on the Look, Insights into the Glance, Attention Economy, and Instagram. And this is an article from an academic journal. We will be talking in the focus lecture about key concepts that are presented by Zuli in the course of this article. It'll also be important that you really are attentive to noticing what seems to be the argument and the series of argumentative claims that she's advancing in the course of writing this article, as well as I want you to really notice how she organizes this article, because when we move into the semester research project, and specifically when we talk about the literature review, we're going to really unpack some of the ways in which the approach or organizational structure of an article or a long form project is a really important component as to whether or not an audience is compelled to accept your argument as convincing and well researched, right, and clear and able to follow along with. And so with this article, we're looking at it not only as a future sample piece for us to talk about when it comes to writing a literature review, but also because the concepts and argument put forth by Zuli in the course of this article, I think are really foundational for understanding how social media scholars in particular have been talking about the social media influencer economy and what it means to be a social media influencer whose work is derived from creative labor on a platform like Instagram. And so we're going to really be relying on this article to help us think through some of the ways that viewers navigate the user interface on Instagram and how social media influencers have to be really conscientious of that navigational process when they're creating the content that ideally will be engaged with by their viewers. In addition to reading Diana Zuli's article, excuse me, you will also be reading a chapter by Trevor Buffoni titled The D'Amelio Effect, TikTok, Charli D'Amelio, and the Construction of Whiteness. Now, it's as it is made clear by this title, Buffoni is talking specifically about TikTok. This is a chapter from a book titled TikTok Cultures in the United States, which was released in 2022, whereas Diana Zuli's article is from 2018. So we're really taking a kind of late 2010s, early 2020s approach to talking about social media this week. But in particular, one of the reasons I wanted us to take a look at Trevor Buffoni's chapter is because his concept of the D'Amelio effect, I think, will be very useful for folks who ultimately may want to design their final project around something related to social media influencers or the TikTok algorithm, or even which creators are able to achieve the highest forms of visibility on a platform like TikTok based on the user interface and algorithm. In addition to that, I think that the way that he organizes his chapter to specify why it is that we as readers should pay attention to TikTok as a platform is an important example for us to look at when it comes to conversations we're going to have in these next few weeks of how does someone go about creating a social media studies project that ensures that there is attention given to, in the event that you have a resistant reader who perhaps doesn't see social media as a relevant or robust form of content creation and critical cultural commentary, how do you confront some of those biases up front to explain for your reader why it is that it's important to pay attention to the content that you're paying attention to? Okay, so really with Diana Zuli and Trevor Buffoni's work, in both cases, we're paying attention to not only the platforms that they are talking about and the types of critical concepts or key concepts that they develop to help articulate the argumentative claims that they advance about them, but we're simultaneously looking to these articles and / book chapter, right, as really great examples of effective argumentation that we can take with us going into the semester research project that will begin next week. Finally, you also have two sections from So What, Chapter 5, that I would like for you to take a look at. The first is pages 103 to 108, and the second is pages 114 to 126. I will also mention that if for whatever reason you have not gotten a copy of So What, you've not been doing the reading from So What as a companion to your other work for the class, this would be a really good time to make sure that you get caught up on those readings, because when we go into weeks 5 to 8, you are writing a ton, and you're writing a ton of long form work. And without having both, listen to / watch the lectures from me where I talk through some of those key points, and at the very least skimmed these sections from So What, you may find it to be a bit more challenging to succeed on these assignments, because I am working under the impression that you are kind of using both of these resources to really help guide you towards preparing to write these more substantial assignments that also count for really large points in your grade. Because you'll also notice, and we'll talk about this more next week, that the first 4 weeks of the semester, all of the assignments that you're submitting are really low in point value, and this is intentional to allow you time to get comfortable with the material and the ways that we're analyzing before you're really working on those high point value assignments. So if you've not had a chance yet to look at So What, Please make sure that you check out the rental and purchase options that I've posted under the course materials module on Carmen. And please make sure that you get caught up on that reading before week 5. Viewings for this week are kind of interesting. I have asked for you to pay attention to a few different types of texts. So you'll notice that you have 2 YouTube videos that are by Emma Chamberlain from her YouTube channel, one being Trying Every Coffee Shop in LA, and the second being My Coffee Recipe. I'll elaborate in the focus lecture a bit more as to why I specifically chose videos from Emma's channel that focus on coffee and her coffee recipe. But my hope is that as you're watching, whether you're familiar already with Emma or not, that you'll just kind of notice and think about some of the themes that come through in these videos. The setting in terms of where they are filmed, the interactivity between Emma Chamberlain and the camera, and by proxy, that camera, of course, standing in for her audience. And I would like for you to also think about, as you're watching, what is it about Emma Chamberlain in terms of, you know, the persona or the image that she presents through her content creation, excuse me, that really allows the public to feel a kind of intimate connection with her, okay? So I want you to really notice things like how long are the videos? What does she talk about? What does she do? Are there a lot of cuts in the video in terms of, you know, kind of moving from one clip to the next or one shot to the next, right? And we'll talk more about these details in the focus lecture, but for now, you have those 2 videos from Emma Chamberlain to really kind of notice some consistencies between them. I also asked for you to scroll through Emma Chamberlain's Instagram profile. Not that I'm expecting you to have specific posts picked out or isolated that you want to focus on, but instead I just want you to get a feel for what kinds of content she posts on Instagram. And as you're scrolling, whether it's a quick 2-minute scroll or 30-minute scroll, what I'd like for you to pay attention to is how does the version of herself that she portrays on Instagram perhaps coalesce with or differ from the version of herself that's portrayed on YouTube, okay? Would you, if you were not familiar with Emma Chamberlain, let's say, get the sense that these 2 profiles are harmonious? Do they offer different things to the viewer? What is conveyed through Instagram that perhaps is and also is not conveyed on YouTube? Additionally, I have 2 brief videos for you that are also posted to YouTube, one of which is Addison Rae reveals the TikTok moments that made her, and it's an interview with Bustle. And the second is a Hulu trailer for the show, The D'Amelio Show. Now, the reason I'm asking you to watch these videos is because I will be talking more substantially about Addison Rae and Charli D'Amelio, as well as Dixie D'Amelio, in my focus lecture for this week. But I also want you to kind of think about the ways and notice the ways in which legacy media industries like reality television and magazine publishing have adapted to include social media stars or internet celebrities in their content that they produce for their audiences. So I want you to consider and notice what are some of the questions that Addison Rae is prompted to answer? What kinds of information does Bustle seem to want her to focus on for the purpose of being interviewed for their audience, right? And in the case of Charli D'Amelio, when we're thinking about the D'Amelio Show, how perhaps might the onset of reality TV shows about internet celebrities also give us some insight into the ways that social media and legacy media are increasingly blending together. Additionally, I have an optional listen for you this week, which is the episode titled The Truth About YouTube. And this is a podcast episode from the podcast Anything Goes with Emma Chamberlain. It is 52 minutes and 27 seconds. So I understand if you don't have the capacity or even desire to listen to this episode. But I do think that it is a useful and just kind of relevant companion piece to what you're already engaging with from Emma Chamberlain for this week. Reason being that I think when it comes to long form content, although we're really focusing on YouTube videos for our long form content for this week, there's something really interesting about a podcast episode that's almost an hour, right? And in coming off of the, installments of Ear Hustle that we listened to from last week, I just want you to continually be thinking about how in the course of a podcast, a creator might additionally be presenting another version of themselves that's not portrayed on their Instagram or their YouTube. And especially in the case of this particular episode, I think Emma Chamberlain does a really interesting job of talking about the evolution of her public self from the time she started posting to YouTube to now in 2022. Okay, so again, this is an optional listen, but I really do encourage you to listen to it. It might be something you can listen to when you're on the treadmill, when you're on a walk, when you're working out. It could be in the background while you're cooking, right? But I think it's a useful companion piece. Before I talk about the assignment snapshots, I'm going to pause to cough, and then I will be right back. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the assignment snapshots, or the overview of week 4 assignments that I've prepared for us. So of course, you have a highlight reel due this week, like you've had every week up until now. I do want to flag that this is your final highlight reel, that you're turning in for the semester. So you only have a total of 4 submissions that you're doing for this particular assignment. So you'll notice that highlight reel number 4 is due on Wednesday, June 1st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, and is this week's installment of your Wednesday weekly assignment. Now, as always, if for whatever reason, if for whatever reason you cannot meet that Wednesday deadline, you are welcome to submit your highlight reel up until Fridays at 3:00 p.m. Eastern. After that point, the assignment is considered missing and will be labeled as a 0 in Carmen. I have also once again included for you the prompt for the highlight reels in case you find it useful to consult them within the course of looking at the slides for the overview lecture. There's nothing different here compared to the past highlight reels that you've completed. All it remains the same. And again, this will be your final submission for a highlight reel. And once again, I've included the writing steps of watch and read, reflect on material, identify elements, take time to outline, incorporate tools, no assumptions made, and get creative. What you do also have for this week is your second response paper, and this is your second of 2 submissions for this particular assignment. So you already submitted response paper 1 in May, and you will be submitting response paper 2 by Saturday, June 4th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So this is your weekly Saturday assignment. Now, as always, if for whatever reason you cannot meet the Saturday deadline for personal reasons, work reasons, mental health reasons, whatever it might be, you can turn in your response paper number 2 up until Monday at 8:00 a.m. Eastern, after which point, if there's not a submission from you, it is considered missing and will be labeled as a 0 in Carmen. So let's go ahead and talk about the prompt for response paper 2. Like I said, it's due on Saturday, June 4th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, but I will accept it up until Monday, June 6th at 8:00 a.m. Eastern. And this is an assignment that you submit on the Carmen assignment portal. Now, as I did with the previous prompt, I include the snapshot from the syllabus that reminds us of what we already know about this assignment based on what was represented in the syllabus that we talked through in week 1. So for our purposes, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm instead going to move us to this section of the prompt titled the guided prompt so that I can remind you of what it is that you do for a response paper. So first, you're going to want to read and watch everything that is assigned for week 4. Then you'll want to revisit and reflect on the materials that you engaged with during week 3. That is the readings, viewings, lectures, and the highlight reels. It's important that you've completed all of the work for weeks 3 and 4 before starting this response paper so that you're in the best possible position to write a strong analysis. It may be beneficial to review the writing steps again, with the exception of incorporate, to organize your thoughts before you begin this essay. So once again, with a response paper, you're putting 2 weeks of the semester in conversation with each other, whereas response paper number 1, you are putting into conversation weeks 1 and 2. For response paper number 2, you are putting weeks 3 and 4 into conversation with each other. So with this in mind, you'll want to select one of the question clusters listed on the next page as you focus for this response paper. And your task is to use what you have read, watched, engaged with, and learned so far to produce a clear, concise analysis of how week 4's theme is in conversation with the theme covered in week 3. More specifically, your response should 1, reflect your familiarity with the assigned primary source material from both weeks, 2, demonstrate your comprehension of assigned secondary source material from both weeks, and 3, offer your preliminary understandings of how the topics covered in these weeks relate to the course's overall theme. When answering your question cluster in your essay, you will want to consider how you can best organize your paragraphs so that your responses are clear and so you can demonstrate how you are refining your understanding of the topics covered by the primary and secondary sources assigned for both weeks. So what I mean by this is you will need to select one of the question clusters that appear on the following page of the prompt as the basis for your response paper number 2. And in the course of organizing your thoughts and conveying your responses for this assignment, you'll want to make sure that you demonstrate for me that you are familiar with the material, right? That you didn't just like skip over watching and listening to and reading the primary sources that were assigned for weeks 3 and 4, that you actually spent some time with them. You're going to want to demonstrate that you comprehend and are, working with a familiarity of and an understanding of the secondary sources and what they contributed in both weeks in terms of concepts and arguments. And you're also going to want to offer some preliminary understandings or really give me some insight into how you're understanding the themes for week 3 and 4 as being connected to our overall theme for the course of making the self or making the selfie, right? So you really want to be thinking about why is it that we perhaps are engaging with these topics in weeks 3 and 4 as it relates to helping us understand something in particular about what it means to make the self online. Once again, formatting requirements. The page count for this assignment is 2 to 3 pages double spaced. 2 pages is the minimum length for this assignment, and the essay may be longer than 3 pages if necessary for conveying your point clearly, but it should not exceed 4 pages. Now, in the event that you produce a 2-page essay rather than a 2.5 or 3-page essay, the essay should fill the entire second page. Otherwise, it's not a 2-page essay. It's a 1.5 pages or a 1.75 pages. So please make sure that you are doing your due diligence in that area. Once again, you should follow MLA format with proper header, line spacing, and page number. No works cited page is required. And if you need some help remembering how to do MLA format, that information is provided in my materials for week 2 that you are welcome to return to. File types, I accept a Word document or a PDF or Google Doc. If you decide to share a Google Doc with me, it should be readable and accessible and editable to me/by me by the deadline, otherwise it's considered late. And if you anticipate that you are going to need an alternate submission schedule beyond the Monday, June 6th extended deadline for this assignment, this request should be made by Thursday, June 2nd at the latest and is not guaranteed unless confirmed by me. All right, hopefully you didn't get too many of the sirens that just went by. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the 2 question clusters that you have options for and that you can choose from. So again, you're going to select one option and address all of the questions in this option. So question set option number 1 works around this overarching question of how might we reimagine what mediums count as academic scholarship? And so for this particular option, you'll be working with the article by K-Swizzle as well as the book chapter by Trevor Buffoni, and pairing those with the viewings and listings from weeks 3 and 4. So the questions that you'll be working with are as follows. In her 2020 article, I Draw a Graphic Dissertation, Therefore I Am, K-Swizzle poses the following questions, among others. Why do we assume that other forms are incapable of the rigor or scope of the academic article? And why do we, by default, go by the assumption that any non-traditional form of inquiry, comics, graphic essays, creative nonfiction, are qualitatively inferior? So based off that, I ask, how does Sohini address these questions in the Comics as Scholarship and Comics as Thinking sections of her article? Relatedly, how does she utilize a combination of word and image to convey her message to the reader? How might terms such as personal narrative, digital artivism, geometrizing, or storyfying be applicable to analyzing the content and form of Sohini's article? Additionally, what core examples does Sohini use to explain how and why her perspective on comics has evolved? So with thinking about the K-Swizzle article, you're going to be really paying attention to how she constructs the article, how some of the terms that we used or learned about in the week 3 focus lecture can be applicable to understanding what it is that she's arguing. And especially you're going to be focusing on how does she use both word and image to make her argument that itself is focused on word and image, okay? Now, in addition to that, you'll also be, again, engaging with Trevor Buffoni's work. And so what I offer here is something that comics, zines, and social media content creation have in common is the persistent issue that due to the form they appear in, the content of creators' contributions may be overlooked, dismissed, and/or stigmatized as not as rigorous as traditional research essays. How might the issues covered in Trevor Buffoni's 2022 chapter titled The D'Amelio Effect, TikTok, Charli D'Amelio, and the Construction of Whiteness help to confront this misconception? For instance, how does Buffoni convey to the reader that paying attention to content creators and their creative labor on TikTok is important? What argumentative claims does he make about TikTok as a platform? And how does he support these claims with key concepts that build on his primary source examples and secondary source references? Consider as well, how and why do both Sohini and Buffoni incorporate personal narrative into their writing? Why might this strategy be relevant to the arguments that they are making about comics and social media in their respective works? And where possible, discuss how one or multiple assigned viewings and listings from weeks 3 and 4 help to visualize the key concepts and arguments offered by Sohini and Buffoni. So again, you're going to also be thinking about Buffoni's work, and specifically you're going to be considering, between Sohini and Buffoni's work, how are they each kind of acknowledging or addressing this overarching issue of how is it that the medium that content is delivered in perhaps going to contribute to the ways in which some readers perceive of them as being not rigorous enough to count as academic scholarship? And how can we, in reading their arguments and engaging with them, work to reimagine what it means to consider certain texts as being academic scholarship beyond just the traditional research essay, okay? So that's your first option for what you could address for response paper 2. Your second option is based around the question of how can self-representation generate social awareness about structural issues that affect marginalized communities and or increase an individual's social and economic capital. So here, rather than focusing on form, which is the focus for question set option number 1, question set option number 2 is really engaged with considering what kind of emerges thus far in the course as being sort of the significant differences between the use of digital tools by folks who are incarcerated as opposed to folks who are on the outside. And so we're looking at some examples between 2 of the articles in weeks 3 and 4 to really help guide us through some of that inquiry. So first, I pose the questions based on the Dawn K-Swizzle article that you looked at for last week, which I write, in her 2017 article, Prisons and Popular Culture, Dawn K-Swizzle presents a survey of the narrative trends, character tropes, and genre evolutions in US-based prison media. She breaks the article into 7 core sections: punishment perceptions and prison imagery, prison stereotypes in popular culture, prison films, prison on the small screen, reality-based prison imagery, gendered perceptions of prison life, and modern prison imagery. In your response paper, select 2 of these sections to focus on. Briefly discuss the reason you decided to analyze these sections, then examine what contribution or contributions each section is making to Cecil's overall argument/focus. For instance, what kinds of information does she present in each section? Where does it appear in the sequence of the article? How do your selected sections build on the information provided in the previous section? And how does it set up necessary context for the section or sections that follow it? In particular, how do your selected sections expand on the main points presented by Cecil in the summary section offered at the beginning of the article? Consider as well, how might this article help to contextualize and explain the limitations of a marginalized population, such as formerly and presently incarcerated people, relying on mainstream media representation to tell their stories? So you're first thinking about how does Dawn K-Swizzle's article take such a complex and large topic, such as prison media in the United States, break it down into sections. And in selecting 2 sections of her article to focus on, you're going to really delve into what are some of the details that she chooses to highlight in these sections, and what does that allow her to really communicate or discuss in regards to prison media's specifics, okay? And here it can be really helpful to think about, given that there is a summary section provided at the beginning of the article, how do the sections that you selected build on or expand on points that she introduces in that summary? Along with that, you'll be pairing Dawn K-Swizzle's article with the work of Diana Zulli, and here's kind of how that will work. So in the second bullet point, I write, your assigned materials for weeks 3 and 4 have each featured podcast episodes alongside social media texts posted to Instagram and YouTube. An important distinction that these materials help to make clear is how content creators on the outside, that is people who are not formerly or presently incarcerated, have direct access to digital tools that content creators on the inside must collaborate with folks on the outside to use in their work. For instance, Diana Zulli's 2018 article, Capitalizing on the Look, Insights into the Glance, Attention Economy, and Instagram, considers how content creators like social media influencers utilize the user interface on Instagram to transform how they are seen by the public. What argumentative claims does she make about Instagram as a platform? And how does she support these claims with key concepts that build on her primary source examples and secondary source references? Consider as well, how does Zulli differentiate between the gaze and the glance? And how does this distinction inform her argument as to how a social media influencer increases their various forms of value within the attention economy? And where possible, discuss how one or multiple assigned viewings from weeks 3 and 4 help to visualize the key concepts and arguments offered by Cecil and Zulli. So really with question set option number 2, what you're engaging with is, whereas folks who are presently or formerly incarcerated often have had to rely on mainstream media representation to tell their stories, though we see a podcast like Ear Hustle challenging that, right, and challenging that framework. By contrast, we see that social media influencers really benefit from having access to digital tools that allow them to self-represent in ways that mean that they don't have to be as beholden to mainstream media representation to tell their stories. And so if you choose to pursue this option, what you're really thinking about then is, how do some of the terms offered by Diana Zulli, like the attention economy, the gaze, the glance, and value, really help us to understand the potential benefits and the larger incentives for social media influencers to pursue this particular type of career path? And how is that so different from, the ways that we're understanding, the inequitable access to digital tools that folks who are presently or formerly incarcerated have had to navigate, and have thus perhaps informed the way that they're creating their content, okay? So that is everything that I have for you today for English 2367. Thank you so much for your patience with me getting the time to get this lecture uploaded, as well as for your patience with me getting grades back to you. I will be working through providing grades this week to make sure that you have those and can utilize that when completing your remaining work for the course, right? As always, if you have any questions, I offer office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 o'clock a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern, and I am more than happy to talk via email during those office hours or to schedule an appointment at an alternate time that works best with your schedule. But for now, this is me, K-Swizzle. Unfortunately, once again, a little sickly, hoping that this does not remain the case every time I talk to you, but appreciating you as always for all of the great work that you are doing in this class. All right, everybody, take care and have a wonderful week.